For 3 years, she lived in a room no one else wanted to enter, while his family argued about money in private hallways. She washed his hands, fed him, and stayed awake through nights that never made the news. She had no title, no last name they respected, and no seat at the table where decisions were made. Then he died, and within days, the family erased her. They took the $2.5 million he left behind and told her she was nothing more than a footnote in his life. No rights, no proof, no voice. What they didn't know was this: hospitals never sleep, cameras never forget, and the woman they ignored had been watching everything. Is not a story about anger, it is a story about patience and how quiet evidence can destroy loud lies. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet endurance, the kind of stillness that only existed in places where people waited for time to make a decision for them. The machines near the bed worked with calm confidence, lights blinking in steady patterns, soft sounds rising and falling like a breath that never belonged to a human chest. Morning light slipped through the half-open blinds and laid thin lines across the floor, stopping just short of the bed, as if even the sun understood boundaries here. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth that still lived in his skin. Her chair had become part of the room over the past 3 years, its legs worn smooth where her feet had rested day after day, night after night. She had learned the exact angle that kept her back from aching too badly, and the precise way to lean forward, so her arm would not fall asleep while her hand rested over his. Her movements were practiced, careful, unhurried. There was nothing dramatic in them, nothing that would ever make someone stop and stare. That was how she had survived this long. By being steady, by being present, by never asking the room for more than it was willing to give. He was awake, though his eyes were tired in a way that sleep no longer fixed. When he turned his head slightly toward her, it was with effort, but also with intention. His gaze held on her face longer than it used to, as if he were afraid that one day soon he would look and not find her there. She noticed the change even before he spoke. She noticed everything now. "You should go home later," he said, his voice thin but clear. "Get some rest." She smiled, a small, controlled curve of the lips that did not ask for reassurance or invite argument. "I rested yesterday," she replied, reaching for the cup of water on the table and adjusting the straw before bringing it closer to him. "You focus on breathing. I'll handle the rest." He obeyed, because he always did with her. He drank carefully, paused, then closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, his gaze moved past her, toward the window, toward the slice of outside life he had not touched in years. "They were supposed to come," he said quietly. She did not ask who he meant. She never did. The answer was always the same, and it never changed the result. She adjusted the blanket instead, smoothing it with gentle pressure, the kind that said she was here and would remain so whether anyone else showed up or not. "They're busy," she said, because kindness did not always require truth. His mouth tightened, not in anger, but in something heavier and older. "Busy," he repeated, and let the words settle between them like dust. She remembered the first time she had walked into this room. Years ago, when the walls had looked too white and the machines too loud. She had not known then how to silence them in her own mind, how to separate fear from responsibility, how to turn care into a routine that kept panic away. Back then, his family had filled the space with voices and promises, with plans spoken confidently and left unfinished. They had shaken hands with doctors, asked questions loudly, and left early, saying they would be back tomorrow. Tomorrow had never lasted very long. She had been the one who stayed when the days stretched and the prognosis hardened into something unmovable. She had learned how to lift him without hurting him, how to clean wounds without showing disgust, how to listen when his pain made him speak in circles. She had learned his silences too, the difference between the one that meant he was tired and the one that meant he was afraid. The nurse came in quietly, nodded to her with familiar respect, and checked the monitors without unnecessary conversation. They all knew her here. They all trusted her. When the nurse left, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had drawn closer to protect what was happening inside. He turned his head again, this time more slowly, and looked at her with an intensity that made her pause. "I changed it," he said. She did not answer right away. She waited, because rushing moments like this often broke them. "Changed? What?" she asked gently, though something in her chest had already tightened. "The paperwork," he continued, his breath uneven now. "The things that decide what happens after." She watched his face carefully, the lines around his eyes, the effort it took for him to hold her gaze. She had learned not to interrupt, not to fill the space with her own assumptions. Whatever this was, it mattered to him, and that meant it mattered. "I made sure you're protected," he said. "You shouldn't have to fight anyone." Her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of the blanket. "You don't need to worry about that," she said, keeping her voice calm and even. "Focus on yourself." A faint smile crossed his lips, tired but certain. "I am," he replied. "This is part of it." He reached toward the bedside table with a hand that shook despite his effort to steady it. She moved quickly, helping him, placing a folder in his grasp before guiding his hand back to rest. The folder was plain, unmarked, the kind that held weight without advertising it. She did not open it. She did not need to. The meaning of it sat heavy in the air between them. They'll be angry, he said, his eyes closing briefly. They always are when things don't go their way. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You don't owe anyone anything, she said. You don't owe me anything either. He opened his eyes again and looked at her. Really looked, as if memorizing details he had taken for granted before. I owe you the truth, he said, and I owe you what's fair. Outside the room, footsteps passed. Voices rose and fell. Life continued without acknowledging the quiet transaction happening here. She nodded slowly, accepting his words without ceremony. Because gratitude in moments like this often felt too small. The hours moved forward without asking permission. Light shifted across the floor. A doctor came and went. The machines adjusted their rhythm. She stayed. She always stayed. When evening came, it did not announce itself with drama. It arrived softly, as if trying not to disturb him. His breathing grew shallow, then uneven, then still. The nurse returned, checked, and stepped back with a look that said the room had changed ownership. She felt the difference immediately. The sudden absence of tension, the strange release that came with the end of long vigilance. She stood slowly, placing the folder carefully into her bag, her movements deliberate and respectful. She touched his hand one last time, not to say goodbye, but to acknowledge what had been shared between them without witnesses. The funeral was days later, held in a place chosen more for appearance than meaning. She stood at the back, dressed simply, her presence noted only briefly by those who had forgotten how often she had been there when it mattered. His family filled the front rows, dressed in practiced sorrow, voices low and controlled. They accepted condolences with ease, spoke of loss in broad terms, and never once looked in her direction. After the service, she waited. She did not approach. She did not interrupt. She watched as they gathered, whispered, and moved as a unit toward the waiting cars. When she finally stepped forward, it was met with polite surprise, then mild irritation. I need to speak to you, she said calmly, addressing the one who seemed to lead. There's nothing to discuss, the woman replied, adjusting her sunglasses. Everything is being handled. By whom? She asked. Our lawyers, the woman said, already turning away. You'll be contacted if necessary. The door closed. The car pulled away. She stood there alone, the sound of gravel under tires marking the end of something she had never been invited into. The first letter came a week later, formal and cold, explaining that there was no record of her involvement in his affairs and no provision made for her in his estate. The second letter was firmer, advising her to cease inquiries. The third did not bother with explanation at all. She read each one carefully, placing them side by side on her kitchen table, her expression unchanged. The apartment was quiet, modest, filled with the signs of a life built around care rather than comfort. She opened her bag and removed the folder, placing it beside the letters. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she turned on her laptop. The screen lit her face with a cool, steady glow. Her fingers moved with purpose, opening files, reviewing dates, times, locations. She cross-checked hospital logs, visitor records, security footage, timestamps she had memorized without knowing why. Every late-night argument in the hallway, every hurried meeting she had pretended not to hear, every moment they thought they were alone had left a trace. She leaned back slightly, considering the shape of what lay ahead, not with anger, but with clarity. They had taken the money. They had underestimated the woman who had watched everything. The building that housed the security office did not look important from the outside. It was tucked between a dry cleaner and a small accounting firm. Its windows tinted just enough to hide the interior without inviting suspicion. People passed it every day without noticing, which was exactly why it existed. Systems that watched everything rarely announced themselves. She arrived early. Not because she was nervous, but because she had learned that arriving early shifted the balance of any conversation. It suggested patience, preparation, and control. She wore a neutral coat, nothing that drew attention, nothing that invited curiosity. In her bag were documents arranged in the order she planned to use them, though she hoped she would not need to show most of them. Inside, the air was cool and faintly smelled of electronics and old coffee. A man at the desk looked up, surprised, then professional. I'm here about footage, she said calmly, from St. Elwood Medical Center. Oncology wing, specific dates. He hesitated, fingers pausing over the keyboard. Footage requests usually come through legal channels, he replied. I know, she said, and placed a printed authorization form on the desk, sliding it forward just enough to invite inspection without desperation. This one already has. He read it carefully, then read it again. Something in his expression shifted, not to alarm, but to recognition. You were listed as an authorized party, he said slowly. She nodded. For 3 years, the man exhaled quietly, as if adjusting an internal calculation. It'll take some time to pull everything, he said. There's a lot of data. I'm not in a hurry, she replied. She waited while he worked, listening to the hum of machines, watching the reflection of screens flicker across the glass wall behind him. She did not pace. She did not check her phone. Waiting had been part of her life for too long to feel uncomfortable now. When he finally handed her a drive, sealed in a small envelope, he looked at her with a mixture of caution and respect. "There's more than you asked for," he said. Once we started pulling records, some patterns stood out. "Thank you," she said simply, standing and placing the envelope carefully into her bag. Outside, the afternoon sun felt sharp against her skin, but she welcomed it. She walked slowly to her car, her mind already moving through the next steps with the same steady rhythm she had once used to measure medication intervals and monitor vital signs. At home, she did not rush. She made tea, let it steep properly, and sat at the table where the letter still lay. Only then did she open her laptop and connect the drive. The screen filled with folders labeled by date and location. She opened the first one. The hallway camera outside his room showed exactly what she remembered. His sister pacing while speaking sharply into her phone, lowering her voice when staff passed, then raising it again when she thought herself unseen. His brother arriving late, leaving early, his visits always timed around something else. Their lawyer appearing more often than family, always with a tight smile and a folder held too close to his chest. She watched without expression, not because she felt nothing, but because the emotions had already passed through her long ago. What remained now was purpose. She opened another file, this one from the parking garage. The timestamps aligned with arguments she had overheard through half-closed doors. She remembered standing by the vending machine, pretending to choose a drink while voices echoed nearby, speaking of assets, of control, of keeping things in the family. At the time, she had said nothing. She had learned early that being underestimated was a form of camouflage. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Cease all attempts to involve yourself in this matter. Any further action will be considered harassment." She read it once, then placed the phone face down on the table and continued working. Over the next few days, she built something carefully, methodically, like a structure designed to withstand pressure. She did not upload anything. She did not confront anyone. She organized timelines, matched conversations to footage, linked statements to actions. She discovered discrepancies that even she had not suspected. Moments where words spoken publicly directly contradicted what cameras quietly recorded. She noticed how often they gathered in private spaces they assumed were safe, how confident they were in their version of events. Confidence, she realized, was often louder than truth. When she finally contacted an attorney, she chose one recommended, not by reputation, but by pattern. Someone who specialized in cases where silence had been mistaken for weakness. Their first meeting was brief. "You have something," the attorney said after reviewing a portion of the material. "Something very solid." "I know," she replied. "What do you want?" The attorney asked. "Money, public correction, closure." She considered the question carefully. "I want the truth to be unavoidable," she said. "What comes after that is negotiable." The attorney studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "That changes how we proceed." Word reached the family faster than she expected. It always did when control slipped. A different lawyer called this time, his tone smoother, his language carefully neutral. "There seems to be some confusion," he said. "We'd like to resolve this quietly." She listened without interrupting, her expression calm. "You've made it clear you believe you were entitled to something," he continued. "Perhaps there's room for compromise." "Compromise requires honesty," she replied. "So far, I haven't seen any." Silence stretched on the line. "What exactly do you think you have?" he asked finally. She smiled slightly, though he could not see it. "Enough," she said, and ended the call. The first crack appeared at a charity gala 2 weeks later. One of the family members laughed too loudly when asked about estate matters, then faltered when a reporter followed up with a simple question. Another declined an interview she would have once welcomed. The lawyer who had spoken so confidently before now avoided public spaces altogether. She watched from a distance, never appearing, never commenting. She allowed rumors to form without feeding them. She understood the power of absence, how it invited speculation far more effectively than confrontation. Behind the scenes, legal documents were filed, not aggressively, but precisely. Each claim referenced evidence without displaying it. Each response forced the family to choose between denial and exposure. They chose denial because it was familiar. That choice cost them. A judge requested clarification, then documentation, then supplementary materials. With each request, the circle tightened. Statements made months earlier were now frozen in transcripts, their inconsistencies highlighted by time and record. She attended one hearing, sitting quietly at the back, her presence noted but not acknowledged. She did not look at them. She did not need to. The shift in the room was enough. Afterward, one of them approached her in the hallway. Anger barely contained beneath politeness. "This isn't necessary," the woman hissed. "You're embarrassing us. You did that yourselves." She replied evenly. "You think this will end well for you?" the woman asked. She met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "It already has," she said, and walked away. Late one evening, she returned home to find another message waiting. This one was shorter. "Let's talk." She did not respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and prepared the final set of files. tagging them carefully, ensuring that each piece of footage was clear, time-stamped, and contextualized. She did not exaggerate. She did not editorialize. She let reality speak in its own unfiltered language. When the files were finally submitted as part of the formal record, she closed her laptop and leaned back, allowing herself a single deep breath. She knew what would happen next. The truth, once invited into the light, rarely stayed quiet. The courthouse did not rise dramatically from the ground, but it carried weight in a way that made people lower their voices without being told. Its stone walls absorbed sound, ambition, and arrogance alike, leaving only facts to echo back. On the morning, everything shifted. The air outside was cold and sharp, the kind that forced clarity into every breath. She arrived alone. Not early this time, and not late, exactly when she intended to be there. Inside, the hallway buzzed with restrained tension. Lawyers moved in controlled lines, heels clicked against polished floors, and quiet conversations carried urgency without volume. The family had arrived together, dressed in dark, expensive clothes, chosen to project unity. They stood close, speaking softly, their confidence carefully rehearsed. From a distance, they looked unbreakable. Up close, they looked tired. She took a seat, several rows behind them, visible but distant. She did not hide. She did not announce herself. She let her presence exist without demand, because now it was unavoidable. When the judge entered, the room settled into silence. Papers were arranged. Throats were cleared. What had once been a private dismissal of her existence was now a public matter of record. The proceedings began methodically. Names, dates. Formalities. The family's attorney spoke first. His tone controlled, his words chosen to sound reasonable rather than defensive. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of intent, a confusion fueled by emotion rather than evidence. He spoke of family legacy, of complicated relationships, of the dangers of assumptions. She listened without reaction. Then her attorney stood. There was no dramatic pause, no raised voice, just a measured calm that cut sharper than anger ever could. "We will not speculate," the attorney said. "We will show." A screen was activated at the front of the room. The first image appeared. A hospital hallway, empty at first glance. The timestamp glowed quietly in the corner. Then figures entered the frame. The sister, the brother, the lawyer. They stopped just outside her room, the same room she had occupied for 3 years. Their voices were muted, but their body language spoke clearly. Tension, calculation, familiarity. The attorney narrated without embellishment. This footage was recorded 6 weeks before the decedent's passing. Note the time. Note the location. The family shifted in their seats. Another clip followed. A parking garage, the lawyer handing documents to the brother, the sister nodding sharply, her posture rigid, impatient. The timestamp aligned perfectly with a claim previously made under oath that no such meeting had occurred. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Quickly silenced, the attorney continued, unrelenting but precise. This is not an isolated incident. More footage, different angles, different days, always the same pattern. Meetings held away from medical staff. Conversations conducted in assumed privacy. Decisions made confidently, as though no one else mattered. She watched the screen, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to see what they saw now. Their own actions, stripped of justification, displayed without commentary. The judge leaned forward. The family's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object. On what grounds?" the judge asked, eyes still on the screen. The attorney hesitated. There were none that would hold. The footage paused on a frame where the lawyer's hand rested on the folder. She recognized instantly, the same one she had placed into her bag on the day everything ended. The attorney for the court turned slightly. "This folder," he said, "contained a revised will, executed legally, with witnesses, and filed appropriately." The family's attorney swallowed. The sister whispered something urgently to her brother. He did not respond. The next document appeared on the screen. Signatures, dates, authorization codes, clean, undeniable. The judge exhaled slowly. Why was this not disclosed? No one answered. The courtroom felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. When the family finally spoke, it was not with confidence, but with fracture. Explanations overlapped, statements contradicted earlier testimony. Attempts to reframe events collapsed under the weight of recorded fact. She felt no triumph. What she felt, instead, was release. Not relief, but resolution. The judge called a recess. People stood. Conversations erupted in low, urgent tones. Reporters gathered near the exits, phones already raised, voices controlled but excited. This was no longer a private dispute. This was exposure. One of the family members turned and saw her then. Really saw her, sitting calmly where she had been all along. Their expression changed, not to anger, but to something colder. Fear. When proceedings resumed, the ruling did not come immediately. Instead, the judge spoke plainly. There is sufficient evidence here to suggest intentional misrepresentation and suppression of legally binding documents. He said, "This court will not tolerate such conduct." The family's attorney attempted one last appeal, but his voice lacked force. The damage was done. By the time the session adjourned, the narrative had shifted completely. What had once been a quiet dismissal of her role had become a public examination of theirs. Outside, the cameras waited. She did not stop for interviews. She did not answer questions. She walked past them with steady steps, her face composed, her silence louder than any statement she could have made. Behind her, the family exited separately. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded without her involvement. Financial accounts were frozen, pending review. Professional associations distanced themselves. Invitations were withdrawn. Board memberships quietly ended. The family that had once moved as a unit now fractured under scrutiny. Each member focused on protecting themselves. The money was returned through legal channels, exactly as outlined. Without apology and without ceremony. She accepted it the same way she had accepted everything else in her life. Calmly. Weeks later, she returned to the hospital one last time. Not to the room, which now held someone else's story, but to the hallway outside. She stood there briefly, hands in her coat pockets, and allowed herself a moment of stillness. No one noticed her. That was fine. She walked out into the daylight, the world moving around her, indifferent and alive. What she carried now was not wealth, but certainty. The certainty that being overlooked did not mean being powerless. The certainty that truth, when documented, did not need permission to surface. The coldest revenge, she understood, was not destruction, it was exposure, and exposure did not fade.